So anyway, with all of that said, there's lots going on. Let's get to it. First, we'll start with Hamas in Mississauga. Yes, Hamas in Mississauga. Joe Blow says, if a Taliban flag in Mississauga isn't enough to tell you that Canada has a serious immigration problem, then you're brainwashed beyond redemption. Here is a couple of people in a pro-Hamas rally telling the Taliban flag-bearing guys, you guys have to go. This makes us look bad. Here we go.
You are not in Afghanistan. You are not in Afghanistan. You should understand this. Yes. We're here for the support. Support. So create the Palestinian flag.
What you're doing is harmful for Palestinians. You're not supporting it.
Yeah.
I don't know what you're doing.
Yes.
You do not represent us.
Yeah. You put the Palestinian
You do
flag.
not represent us. Take
Yeah.
it off. Take it off.
Yo, don't touch my shit.
No, yeah. You don't put it. No.
Your umbrella just hit me. This is not drag story time, ma'am.
This is not drag story time. So, I mean, is it irony when you've got the Palestinian flag bearing people saying, listen, the Taliban flag guys, you guys are making us look bad. Is that irony? I don't know. Post Millennials Post is reporting, wow, anti-Israeli protesters in Mississauga called Israel a Nazi state. So they've got the pro-Palestinian flags, and they're very upset at Israel. And here's part of that. It's just a bunch of people kind of milling around with the Palestinian flag. So there's that going on. Karma Saeed as well says, green smoke atop a bus shelter with Palestinian flags and iconic scenery in the background. This is Mississauga, Canada, my hometown. So I don't know what, and I looked this up. I tried to, because I wanted to express to you what the meaning of this was. I looked, and if you know, please do let me know in the comments, because I'll mention it tomorrow, or I'll try to. But what this smoke thing means, is this some kind of extra, like we're super here, like here's our flag and we've got smoke? I don't know. Or is this like a rallying point, like come to the smoke? I don't know what the smoke thing is, but he's standing on a bus shelter waving a Palestinian flag and letting off green smoke. Here we go. Okay, so that's going on. Interesting. Very interesting stuff. Rex Glacier says, if this was a white guy doing that with a Confederate flag or a Nazi flag, there would be no silence from Justin Trudeau and Doug Ford, who would be calling in the army right about now. Yeah, there's no horses trampling anybody. There's no, there's no people thinking we've got to arrest the leaders of this, et cetera, et cetera. Karma, as well as pointing out the Taliban flag, says Palestinian protesters ask masked men with Taliban flags to leave. Very interesting. It's the interpolitics of all of that bears noticing. Ezra Levent says there are two pro-Hamas MPs in Trudeau's caucus, Omar Alghabra and Urqa Khalid. Both represent this neighborhood near Toronto, nicknamed Gaza Plaza. Before Alghabra was appointed to cabinet, he lobbied for the legalization of Hamas and Hezbollah. So there you go. Hezbollah also ran in elections. I'm sure that I remember George W. Bush being very, very clear about Hamas running in elections. And then people got very upset because Hezbollah also ran in elections and got legitimacy through winning elections. But I can't remember where. I can't remember which country. So I don't want to say a country because it'll probably be wrong. Here is Mulrooney. He's weighing in on the side of Israel. He says, CBC is reporting, former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney says Canada should fully support Israel in its fight against Hamas, but warns that Ottawa now only has limited influence in global affairs. Yeah, shocker. Shocker there. Justin Trudeau squandered that away by being an unserious fool. Here is Maxime Bernier. He's responding to this National Post report that says Poilievre promises review of foreign aid to prevent money from financing terrorists. And that was reported yesterday. I showed you the video of him announcing that. And Maxime, and I said it was a strong position for Conservative to take. It was probably the strongest I'd heard Poilievre take so far. People will really like it, and it's hard to criticize it. Maxime Bernier is criticizing it. Good for him. And I think this is a good way to differentiate and show leadership as well. He says, the usual fake conservative weak sauce. We don't need to review foreign aid to prevent it from financing terrorists. We need to abolish all foreign aid. I think that a real valid argument could be made there. I really do. I really think that we're just throwing money away. We don't have a good way to measure the value that we are giving. We don't have a good way to value how these millions of dollars are being spent in foreign countries. I've seen posters on beaches in 2019 reminding people not to poop on the beach, paid for by the government of Canada. And I thought, I can't believe my tax dollars pay for this. Why? And it seems like we're throwing money at people and we're saying, you're so poor, we need to help you, here's money, and we just throw money at them, and they go, what do you want to do with this money? I don't know, put some posters up reminding people not to poop on the beach. Why do they need posters to remind people not to poop on the beach? That's a whole other question. One that I don't know the answer to. I could speculate though, but you wouldn't like it. Or the powers that be wouldn't like it, I'm sure. But still, fundamentally, I think that we should not be spending money in a foreign country and have no barometer of the value Canadian taxpayers get for that. Is it valuable to feel good because we're helping? In what way are we helping? Are we sure we're helping? Like, how do we measure that? How can I check on how much we're spending, what specifically that spending is on, how that helps, right? Like, what are the barometers of that? Who's decided that helps? Because people have said, you can't prevent children who are, disassociating with their gender. It's very unhelpful to tell them that's a mental health problem, and cutting off your penis and or mutilating your breast won't help with that. So I don't trust these people about how they view helping. So exactly what are we doing? What's the goal? Short term, long term, how much is this going to cost us? Is there value here for them? Is there value here for us? Why are we doing this? And I think that fundamentally we don't have a very good way to hold anybody accountable for anything, right? Public health masks your children for 8 hours a day, and nobody can tell us which experts were consulted. It's $47 million to find out which experts were consulted. Are you sure? Yep. That's exactly what happened to me. Okay, here is color on Israel. We have to talk about Israel and Hamas and what's happened in the last day and a half since the planned ground invasion of Gaza stalled, I guess, because yesterday I was seeing reports that they were giving hospitals 2 hours to leave. They had done airstrikes in and around the Gaza Strip. They had done airstrikes that had hit civilians. There's a whole bunch of news reports coming out of there, casualty reports as well, talking about, and I talked about it yesterday. Here's this one saying there's 1,900 Palestinian civilians. Israel intelligence also seemed to be backworking all of a sudden after ignoring warnings from Egypt and failing to stop Hamas attacks. They went from not having any idea what was going on to dropping airstrikes all over supposed Hamas positions, taking out over 1,900 Palestinian civilians along the way. Okay, and that's according to the United Nations. Maybe not. But
in Israel many
here is Charlie Kirk, and he's a talking head in the States. And he puts together, I've been skeptical of this because it seems like somebody's specific benefits from this whole situation, and it's not Hamas. Hamas isn't. Somebody said, well, they wanted a prisoner exchange, so they kidnap people in order to trade those people in, but the violence they committed would preclude that as being an objective. If you want a prisoner exchange, then you have prisoners that are valuable, that aren't mistreated, that aren't traumatized other than being kidnapped, that's going to be traumatic. But otherwise they haven't been, harmed in another way. They haven't been abused physically or mentally or sexually or anything like that, right? Sexually is covered under physically, but I wanted to separate it out. But they didn't do that, right? And so to me, the whole attack the attack looked like max fear, max impact, a big flash. But they weren't trying to stake out positioning. They weren't trying to get a whole bunch of very valuable kidnapping targets so they could trade them for the prisoners or anything like that. The objective did not seem to be that. It seemed to be do as much terror as possible, leading to me reporting it as a terrorist attack, because it seems like a terrorist attack. It doesn't seem like a government trying to protect its sovereignty, trying to protect itself. It seemed like a scorched earth strategy where there's going to be a retaliation if you do the violence that you did. So I don't know. Anyway, Charlie Kirk articulates this much better than I have, and I thought, let's listen to that. So let's listen to that. Here we go.
I've been to Israel many times. The whole country's a fortress. When I first heard this story, I still had the same gut instinct that I did initially. I find this very hard to believe. I've been to that Gaza border. You cannot go 10 feet without running into a 19-year-old with an AR-15 or an automatic machine gun that's an IDF soldier, right? The whole country is surveilled. And so let me just kind of go through this. We don't talk about Israeli politics very often, and most Americans don't know this. The last 9 months, Israel was on the brink of civil war. It's not an exaggeration. This judicial stuff, there were hundreds of thousands of Israelis taking to the streets because Bibi Netanyahu was basically redefining the Israeli constitution. That's not an exaggeration, right? He said the judicial branch has too much power. There were protests planned this week against Netanyahu, where they anticipated tens of thousands of people to take to the streets. That's all gone, Patrick. Netanyahu now has an emergency government and a mandate to lead. I'm not willing to go so far that saying that Netanyahu knew or there was intelligence here, but I think some questions need to be asked. Was there a stand down order? Was there a stand down order? 6 hours? I don't believe it. Israel's the size of New Jersey. When I took a helicopter ride from Jerusalem to the Gaza border, it's 45 minutes. Wow. 6 hours. They're live streaming the killing of Jews. Did somebody in the government say stand down? That is a legitimate, non-conspiracy question. The whole country is the IDF. The whole country is. Yeah. And you're trying to tell me that they're going to concerts and kibbutzes and schools and by report.
So the governments took 6 hours to respond, right? How is that possible? How is that possible at all? Here is some of what Charlie Kirk was talking about. This is from July 22nd, 2023. So we'll go back to midsummer. Those chilly days of July. This July was colder than a lot of Julys in the past 10 years. Anyway, hundreds of thousands march in Israel against Netanyahu's judicial overhaul, right? This is reported by the AP. Here is another one. This is being reported as Israelis being I heard this being reported this morning as Israelis chanting Bibi Netanyahu is a murderer, is a baby murderer. And I thought, that seems not right. I need more information about this. No, they're misrepresenting this anti-government judicial reform protest from back in March as an anti-government, anti-war march in Israel today that doesn't support Bibi Netanyahu. So that's interesting to me. But this is the original thing is organizers estimate 500,000 people attended the demonstration. This is reported by the Telegraph on March 12, 2023. And there's a community note as well. Oh, here it is. It says live from Israel now, 500,000 Israelis are protesting against Netanyahu, who are power hungry and warlord tyrant. Okay. And it says readers added context. This image is from Saturday, March 4th of people gathered to protest against the judicial reform in Israel. The image has the Telegraph logo in the upper right corner. There's a video from the same angle in the Telegraph's article on March 12th. Here's the source. So there you go. It's being misrepresented. But also Netanyahu has had a problem keeping his country together. And like Charlie Kirk says, who knows if Netanyahu knew, if somebody knew, but was there a stand down order issued? Did somebody tell people to stand down? I mean, we saw and we're seeing the January 6th, the reality of that, right? And that's interesting. Jim Jordan becomes speaker. Do you think he'll release the January 6th tapes? Do you think anybody will care? Will they just Hunter Biden it? Maybe. Hunter Biden's laptop it? Maybe. Not give it crack. No. Make it disappear. Clandestine says, who benefits the most from all of this Israel situation? The deep state. Why? The mainstream media are not talking about NATO's colossal failure in Ukraine, but we still have to deal with that. Nazis in the Canadian Parliament, Biden's crimes and impeachment, Trump's growing popularity, the failure of vaccines, the origin of COVID-19. Poof. It's like a magic trick, right? It's like a magic trick indeed. The Telegraph is reporting as well, foreign students, academics, and workers who commit anti-Semitic acts or praise Hamas face being expelled from Britain under plans being drawn up by the Home Office. That's going to be really difficult to monitor, right? Like if you're pro-Hamas, like Mississauga is not allowed to go to the United Kingdom, right? Which is a problem because they've got a lot of family there. Jackie says, all of these caucus members putting out similar statements is PMO trying to have it both ways. These statements sanctioned. So the Prime Minister's office says Israel has a right to defend itself, but then the caucus vilifies Israel. We see you, Justin. We see you. So Yasser, I can't say his name, Yasser N. He puts out a communication and he is sending it to Justin Trudeau, and he is an Ottawa Centre MP. Yasser N is an Ottawa Centre MP, and he says, "Dear Prime Minister, like all Canadians, I've watched with horror and sadness as devastating violence has been unleashed on Palestinian and Israeli civilians. I unequivocally condemn the acts of terrorism committed by Hamas, which resulted in the loss of innocent Israeli civilians. I also condemn the siege of Gaza. The call to evacuate more than 1 million civilians across extremely dangerous terrain within 24 hours ensures death and further unspeakable suffering for innocent Palestinian civilians, including children. The government of Israel must comply with all of its obligations under international law." Meanwhile, here at home, acts of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia have increased rapidly. The idea of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia independently are exactly the same idea, meant to shut down any kind of criticism of the people who are supposedly victims of these false things that we're supposed to believe are true, but are only true in the context of you can't criticize this group of people because that's anti-Semitic or Islamophobic. It's the same thing. James Lindsay talks about it a lot, but it is meant to derail any ability to criticize policies or practices or anything like that. I just want to make that really clear. It's very, very, very insidious because it gets into the culture in a way that is very difficult to argue against, because people don't want to be called racist or anti-Semitic or Islamophobic, I guess, is even getting in there, right? I think it's a very interesting situation. It's manipulative, and I just wanted to point it out. I'll start back at the beginning. Meanwhile, here at home, anti-Semitism and Islamophobia have increased rapidly. It's a lie. I've heard from members of the Jewish and Muslim faiths whose families and friends are frightened, isolated, and in need of our support. Our government must do all we can together with provincial and municipal authorities to ensure Canadians are safe in their communities and places of worship. My family, like many other immigrants, came to Canada for the opportunity to build a life in a country that protects human rights, respects the rule of law, and celebrates diversity. We must continue to defend and protect these values and these rights for all Canadians. Prime Minister, you have shown leadership on this issue for Canadians, and I am now asking for our government to demonstrate this same leadership on the international stage. Specifically, our government must lead calls for a ceasefire, support the opening of humanitarian corridors with increased aid for assistance, return of all hostages, and insist on the immediate halt of the ground invasion of Gaza, including urgent restoration of supply of electricity, water, and food to Palestinians. Only once these critical elements have been accomplished can the work towards peace continue. In addition, I request the Government of Canada increase funding available under the Security Infrastructure Program to cover the costs of security personnel that are needed at the moment at many synagogues, mosques, and other cultural facilities across the country. We must do everything possible to protect the lives of innocent Israelis and Palestinians and harmony in Canada. How many churches got burned again? How many churches burned down? Islamophobia, terrible, right? Anti-Semitism, oh, awful. Christian churches burned. Well, we understand the anger by the First Nations people, and we all look the other way, et cetera, ignoring the fact as well that First Nation churches themselves were burned in the arson spree that sprung out across Canada. It's very telling because people fret, right? Oh my gosh, it's anti-Semitic, it's Islamophobic, but burn a couple of churches and, just fine. That's no problem. It's very interesting indeed. Here's Justin Trudeau getting in on this whole thing. One of the plans would be, or one of the speculations on what the plan is that we have a situation where the gang violence, as in Sweden, gets so bad that they have to roll out a surveillance state in order to keep you safe. They don't want to deport the bad people who we've imported. They want to surveil everyone and arrest the people who speak out against it, I guess. Justin Trudeau weighs in on this Gaza situation. Canada is deeply concerned by the dire humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. Unimpeded humanitarian access is essential to address the urgent needs of civilians. Canada calls for international law, including humanitarian and human rights law, to be respected. So will that happen? I'm not sure. Melanie Joly looks like she's dressed for a backyard barbecue in a very, very big floral print dress. And she says, I met with my Jordanian counterpart in Amman. We focused on the declining humanitarian situation facing Palestinian civilians in Gaza, as well as the impact of Hamas and their terrorist attack on Israel and on regional peace and security. And then another one, she says, I met with the United Nations Philip L. to discuss the need to protect civilians, including Palestinians, aid workers, and the urgent need for humanitarian access, including food, fuel, and water. And this guy is the Commissioner General of the United Nations, the UNRWA. So this is the UN agency for Palestinian refugees. Okay, so she's talking to people who matter, I guess. But again, is this something that anybody can facilitate? Or like, I don't see how Canada sending $10 million or having a meeting with this guy is going to meaningfully change the direction of what's going on in Israel and Palestine at this point in time. Here is Mario, and he says, just in, key statements from the Saudi Crown Prince. The kingdom seeks to intensify communication, work to calm the situation and stop the escalation in Gaza. Saudi Arabia rejects targeting civilians and disrupting infrastructure in Gaza. We must work to restore the peace process to ensure that Palestinians obtain their rights. International humanitarian law must be respected, including lifting the siege on Gaza. So people are pushing back internationally, right? This was 6 o'clock this morning, the 15th. So people are pushing back against the plans that were set to roll. But I guess we're postponed. Jeremy Mackenzie's reporting, while BNO News is reporting Israel's invasion of Gaza was planned for this weekend, but has been delayed by a few days, in part because of cloudy conditions, according to the New York Times. Yeah, it's a little cloudy out. That's reported October 14th at 8:02 p.m. Jeremy Mackenzie said, clouds sounds more like cold feet, second guessing, infighting, and international pressure to me, but sure, clouds. Yeah, I mean, yeah, right, plausible. Wall Street Silver says, why is everyone calling for ceasefire in Gaza? But that seems to be completely off the table for doing the same in Ukraine. Maybe we should hear a bit more noise about the Ukraine ceasefire. That would cost 100 times more lives. That war has cost 100 times more lives than anything that has happened in Gaza or Israel this year. So, right. Very interesting that we have to have a ceasefire there, but Ukraine, keep going. Keep spending the money. Here is a woman who she's talking about how all of this is very, very complicated. And this is a situation where this woman is correct in talking about the beheaded babies, but incorrect in a lot of her other statements. And so there's a lot of misinformation out there. And so here is Rebel News interviewing pro-Palestinian protesters in Mississauga. Here we go.
Hamas is not a terrorist group.
Oh, it isn't, ma'am.
First of all, Hamas is not a terrorist group. Hamas is not a terrorist group.
What is it, like a motor?
Repeating something like that, it sounds a little like it sounds like a religious thing that you repeat over and over again, like Hail Marys or something like that. It doesn't make it true. And when you act like a terrorist, if somebody kills a non-combatant, if somebody kills that person in cold blood or murders a family member in front of somebody, that's bad. Like I think that I hope that we could all agree that that's bad. But she says everything they did was valid. And I think I can't agree with that. And I can't agree that people who act under the banner of Hamas and engage in those kind of actions, like killing innocent people, killing people in front of their family members, that kind of stuff, that's bad. You can't do that. You shouldn't do that. That's a horrific thing to do. That's not something that we should look past and say, well, they deserve that. Because like when you get down to it at that situation, those people didn't deserve that. I don't think. And maybe somebody can make an argument that they did, but I don't think that they do. And so this woman does not represent what I feel, but I think that it's important to hear what she's saying because people believe this. It's important to hear this because you have to know what's out there. People should understand what other people believe. Okay, so that's why I'm playing this. Okay, I'm not playing this because listen to her. I agree with her. Although she tells Menzies here, you have to know the news. The baby thing was fake, right? But then I don't agree with the rest of the things that she says. Here we go.
Motorcycle club.
It is a resistance that has been fuming for 75 years of colonialism, of occupation, of murder, of rape, of little children, of women. That's what they are. They are resistance.
Do you think Canada is a colonialist country too?
Everything that they do is justified.
Including what happened last week?
Every single thing they have done is justified.
Ma'am, there were children murdered. There were babies beheaded.
Babies beheaded, really? Please educate yourself.
Well,
Please check the news, because as a news reporter, you gotta check the fucking news, because they said that shit was fake, okay? Multiple times. Different channels, even Biden himself, his ministers and his idiots said.
So I'm just going to stop it there. She's got machine guns for earrings. I noticed, see, she's got yellow machine guns for earrings. That's pretty concerning. One of the other things I think it's funny, she's talking about how Biden's an idiot, and he even said, that idiot Biden, he agrees with me that the baby thing was not true. I showed you that. The White House walked back Biden saying he saw the confirmed pictures of beheaded babies. That's not true. He was responding to a news article. So it's very, very interesting with people who think that everything Hamas has done has been justified and there's nothing anybody can say to convince this person otherwise. I don't know that you can have a rational argument with somebody who has that taken ideologically. But that's out there in Canada, no less, right? And articulated very strongly to a strong personality. David Menzies is no shrinking violet, right? Mel Jolie, again, she says, with the team from our mission in Jordan, we're working together on how we help get Canadians out of the West Bank as early as next week. Huh. How many Canadians are in the West Bank? Are we talking like people who grew up in Canada and moved to the West Bank for, I don't know, the opportunities? Or how do people have mixed or dual citizenship? Or are we talking about like workers who are in the West Bank who are working on behalf of Canada? Is that who we're getting out? I don't know. Anyway, I'm not sure. Very grateful, she continues, for their diligent efforts in being a resource to Canadians in the region. Thank you for all your work. Maybe it's just workers in the region who are being removed from the West Bank. But that's a little late next week, right? Like, we know they're planning to flatten the West Bank on Saturday. We're asking them to hold off. Looks like rain. Fingers crossed, right? Like, next week, I mean, it's a little late, Melanie Jolie. So even if it is workers, and if it's not workers, well, I've got a whole resettlement thing here. Everybody and his dog has said, no, we don't want the Palestinian people coming here. So it's interesting. A lot of people are fearing that they're going to end up in the United States and Canada or Western countries because there's nowhere else for them to go. So that'll be interesting as well, right? So possibly either they come to Canada or the United States, or they stay where they are and we continue the humanitarian atrocity that's continuing and has continued since I've been alive, I suppose. Although Hamas has not been an entity for 75 years. Hamas was created in 2003 or something like that, and took leadership in 2006. Maybe they were an entity before 2003, but I don't think they were an entity until they were a major player entity, until they were backed by Israel and the West. Israel backing them by encouraging other Middle Eastern countries to fund Hamas to prevent Palestinian statehood. Okay, Lucas says, here's some rebuttals I've come up with to counter Zionist talking points I've encountered using their framing and reasoning to destroy their narrative. I've heard a story multiple times very recently talking about how if you get involved in an argument with a so-called Zionist, this applies to Marxists, this applies to Antifa, this applies to all the ideologically captured gender zealots and the rest of them. If you get into an argument with them and you beat them, they will forget that argument ever took place. They will play stupid, they will misrepresent, they will lie, they will use they will use a word that means something different than you think it means in order to trick you into agreeing with them. They will do all sorts. The little story that I read was much better written than what I'm talking about now. Maybe I'll find it. I'll see if I can find it. Hold on. I can't find it. But fundamentally, one of the other things, and I talk about this often, is I often feel like I'm fighting a multi-headed hydra. Once you nail one down, you don't have time to go after the rest. And they talk about this feature being similar to like closing your hand around slime, right? Like you're arguing with a Marxist and you nail them down to the point and you've got them and you close your hand around slime and they've just sidestepped all your arguments. And then if you do nail them down, by the next day they've already forgotten and you're back to square one, them having learned nothing and you just becoming frustrated. And so it's interesting to see those kind of characteristics reemerge. And so Lucas says, here are some rebuttals I've come up with countering these talking points. And some of them are good. I like this one, you sound like an anti-Semite or Jew hater. And the rebuttal is, that's your opinion. I don't care about people's opinions. I only care about facts. And so I ask you, is what I'm saying true or false? And a lot of this is, if you don't stand with Israel, you support terrorism. Hamas is to blame, not Israel. There are no innocents in Gaza, right? These are arguments being made in favor of Israel's action. There are no innocents. The rebuttal would be, if you speak like that, how do you not expect Palestinians or Gaza, people who live in Gaza, not to feel the same about Israelis? And are you really telling me that all Gazan babies are not innocent? Regardless, your insane opinion that they're all responsible for what Hamas does doesn't give you the right to mass murder those who aren't. And again, somebody said it would be like all of us being responsible for what Justin Trudeau has done to the country, right? And to be collectively punished for his idiocy. There are a lot of people who don't support Justin Trudeau, right? There are a lot of people who would be very upset if we were mass punished for Justin Trudeau's idiocy. And that's what we're looking the other way on in this situation in Gaza. And so there are other arguments. The link is in the description, or it should be, fingers crossed. And you can check it out. I think I found it interesting, but it's a little beyond the scope of the podcast to go through all of